The package arrived on a Tuesday morning, plain and unremarkable, the kind that could have been dropped at any doorstep without drawing attention. No sender's name, no return address, just my name typed in a thin, almost trembling font, Ethan Ward. I might have ignored it if not for the weight. It wasn't heavy, but it had presence, as if whatever was inside knew it had been waiting for me. I carried it into my apartment, the echo of my footsteps filling the narrow hallway, the same way silence had filled my life since Clara disappeared. Inside the package was a single black envelope, thick paper, expensive, a faint trace of perfumed jasmine, or maybe I only imagined it. My fingers hesitated before opening it, as though they remembered what my mind tried to forget. The photograph inside was glossy, printed on film stock I hadn't seen in years. It showed a street corner familiar, wet asphalt reflecting the orange glow of a streetlight. A man standing there, his head slightly turned, coat collar pulled up against the cold. It was me. The photo wasn't taken from across the street or from a passing car. It was taken close enough that I could almost see the pulse in my neck, the shadow of breath leaving my mouth. My chest tightened. I turned the photo over. There were words scribbled in the corner, the ink smudged slightly, as if written in haste. You weren't supposed to be there, C.H. My mind froze. C.H. Clara Hayes. She had been gone for 11 months. The police found her camera bag floating near the pier, memory card wiped clean. Her body was never recovered. And now, somehow, she was taking pictures of me. That night, I didn't sleep. The photo sat on my kitchen table under the dull yellow light, watching me as I poured another glass of whiskey. I kept waiting for it to make sense, for some rational explanation to surface. None did. At 2:17 a.m., I finally gave in. I pulled open the drawer where I'd hidden what was left of her things, a broken lens cap, a crumpled ferry ticket, and a single roll of undeveloped film I could never bring myself to destroy. I held the film to the light. The edges had begun to curl. On the label, written in her neat, careful handwriting, were the words, "Don't look back. The city always sounds different after midnight. It breathes slower, like it's holding something in." Outside my window, rain slid down the glass in uneven trails, breaking the reflection of the street lights into trembling fragments. I sat at my desk, the photograph still lying beside me, half shadowed by the lamplight. I hadn't noticed the small cassette tape until I was about to throw the package away. It was stuck to the bottom of the box with a strip of old adhesive tape, nearly invisible. A single word was written on it in black marker: play. The handwriting was hers. I would recognize those letters anywhere, delicate, slanted slightly to the right, like she was always in a hurry to finish saying what she needed to say. I didn't own a tape player anymore. No one did. But the evidence lab at work still had one, buried among the outdated equipment. So the next morning I slipped the tape into my coat pocket and took the long way to the lab. The building was almost empty when I arrived. Forensic work is quieter than most people imagine. There's no drama, no shouting, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the steady rhythm of machines cataloging what's left of people's lives. I shut the door behind me, slid the cassette into the player, and pressed play. For a few seconds there was only static. Then her voice. "Ethan, if you're hearing this, it means I was right." My hand froze above the desk. "Don't try to find me. Don't go back to the pier. They're watching you now?" Her tone was calm, too calm. I could hear faint sounds in the background, a car engine, maybe, or the ocean. I had to disappear. "You'll understand soon. Look for the one I couldn't photograph." The tape clicked, then silence. I played it again, and again. Each time the same 23 seconds. "Look for the one I couldn't photograph." I leaned back in my chair, the sentence looping in my mind like a needle stuck on a record. Who couldn't she photograph? And who were they? The answers weren't in the tape, but as I ejected it, something caught my eye, a tiny strip of film wedged inside the case, taped to the inner plastic. It showed a partial image of a face blurred, unrecognizable, but in the lower corner, a reflection caught in glass. My own eyes staring back. I hadn't noticed the building before, maybe because it was always there, ordinary, symmetrical, like every other block of glass and brick facing mine. But after the tape, I couldn't stop looking at it. From my living room window, the top floor was just visible between the rain-streaked reflections. A single light stayed on every night, faint and yellow, long after the rest of the city went dark. The rational part of me, the part trained to find evidence, to explain things, told me it was nothing. Someone working late, a student, a night owl. But the other part, the part Clara once said could feel when something was wrong, wouldn't let it. 3 nights after I listened to the tape, I decided to cross the street. The air was heavy with the smell of wet asphalt and car exhaust. I pulled my coat tighter as I stood in front of the building's entrance. No doorman, no cameras, just an old brass intercom with faded numbers. I pressed 4B at random. A crackling voice answered. "Yeah?" I hesitated. "Delivery." A buzz, and the door clicked open. The hallway smelled of dust and paint thinner. The elevator was out of order, so I took the stairs. The steps groaned under my weight, each one echoing up the narrow shaft like a heartbeat. 4th floor. Apartment B. The door was slightly ajar. I froze. Inside, the air felt colder, like the temperature dropped 10 degrees the moment I crossed the threshold. No lights, no sound, just the faint hum of a refrigerator and the smell of old coffee. The walls were lined with photographs, hundreds of them, pinned, taped, scattered. Some were of streets I knew, others of faces blurred in motion. And in the center of the room, illuminated by the street light filtering through half-drawn curtains, stood a camera on a tripod. Its lens pointed directly toward my apartment window. On the table beside it lay a stack of developed photos. I picked up the top one. It was me again, sleeping this time, the curtains half open, the faint outline of my shoulder caught in the dim light of dawn. My pulse thudded in my ears. I flipped through the rest. Me walking home. Me locking the door. Me standing at my window holding the first photograph. The last image stopped me cold. It wasn't me. It was her, Clara. She was standing in my kitchen, her hand resting on the table where the photograph had been. The timestamp in the corner read yesterday, 11:43 p.m. I left the apartment without touching anything. My fingers ached from how hard I'd been gripping the photo, the edges cutting faint white lines into my skin. The streets were almost empty. The rain had stopped, but the world still looked wet, like it hadn't decided whether to keep crying. Back home, I locked every door twice. I closed the curtains, turned off the lights, and sat in the dark. The city beyond the glass pulsed faintly, car headlights streaking through the fog, distant sirens bending in and out of silence. On the table, the last photo lay under the lamp. Clara's face was partly hidden by motion blur, but I could still recognize her profile, the curve of her jaw, the way her hair always fell across her cheek. She looked alive, too alive to be a ghost. I turned the photo under the light, hoping for something, an angle, a detail, a clue. That's when I saw it. In the reflection of the kitchen window, behind her, barely visible, a shape, a shadow, someone standing outside my apartment. The photo wasn't just a message. It was a warning. I grabbed my phone and zoomed in on the image until the pixels broke apart. The shadow's outline was human, but wrong, elongated, distorted, like someone leaning too close to the glass. I checked the timestamp again, 11:43 p.m. I'd been awake at that time, sitting right there at that same table. I should have seen something, but I didn't. I opened the blinds a fraction, staring at the darkened glass. My own reflection stared back, pale, sleepless, uncertain. And then, for a split second, another face appeared beside mine. It was gone before I could breathe. The phone buzzed in my hand. A text. Unknown number. "Stop looking, Ethan." I froze. My chest went hollow. I typed back before I could stop myself. "Who is this?" No reply. The screen dimmed, then flashed again. A new message appeared, no words, just an image. A photo of me, taken from the window across the street. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing in the kitchen, half light, half shadow, watching me with that same quiet look she used to give when she knew something I didn't. 3 nights passed without rest. By the 4th, I stopped pretending. The apartment felt smaller now, every sound amplified, the hum of the fridge, the creak of the floorboards, even the faint ticking of the clock I once forgot to wind. I began noticing things I'd never seen before. Scratches near the window frame, fingerprints on the inside of the glass. At dawn, I decided to go through her belongings again. The box was where I'd left it, top shelf of the closet, taped shut. Inside were the same things: the broken lens cap, the ferry ticket, the undeveloped roll of film. But beneath the cardboard divider, pressed flat against the bottom, was something new. A letter, unsent, unfolded once, then sealed again with a strip of aged tape. The handwriting was hers. My throat tightened as I peeled the tape away. The paper had yellowed around the edges, the ink slightly faded, but every word still carried the weight of her voice. "Ethan, I don't know how much you've found or what you've seen. If you're reading this, then I failed to disappear completely. You always said the camera was a mirror, that it never lies, but that was before we learned how easily truth can be framed. I kept the negatives because they aren't just images. They're records of light, of time, of who was really there. If you develop the last roll, you'll see something you can't unsee. Maybe that's why I couldn't. Don't trust the reflections, Ethan. They remember things we've forgotten. See. I read the letter twice, 3 times. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. I could almost hear her voice behind the words, soft, deliberate, breaking on the edges of fear. Don't trust the reflections. The window beside me caught the morning light, washing the glass in gold. And for just an instant, I thought I saw movement, not outside, but within the reflection itself. Something shifting, like a curtain drawn over another world. It took me hours to decide. The film canister sat on the table beside Clara's letter, small, harmless, and heavy with everything I didn't want to know. By sunset, I'd convinced myself I needed to see it. Not for her, for me. Because silence, especially hers, had become louder than any answer. At the lab, the air smelled of chemicals and old dust. I'd processed thousands of rolls of film before, but this one felt different, as if the metal cylinder was pulsing faintly in my hand. Every motion was deliberate. Scissors, gloves, the red light overhead. My breath sounded foreign inside the quiet. I wound the strip onto the reel, dipped it into the developer, and waited. The seconds dragged like hours. When I finally held the negatives up to the light, my heart stopped. There were 7 frames. The first 5 were familiar streets, corners, reflections. But the 6th was darker. A distorted image of me, standing in front of my own window, just as the previous photographs had shown. Only this time, my reflection in the glass was wrong. It wasn't mirroring me, it was moving on its own. The 7th frame was black at first glance, but when I tilted it, faint outlines began to emerge. A figure reaching forward, as if from inside the film itself. The hand sharp, delicate pressed against an invisible barrier. Then I noticed the surface. The emulsion wasn't smooth. It was rippled, warped like something had burned through from the other side. I scanned the negatives, magnified them on a lab monitor. The 6th frame came into focus. My reflection's face was blurred, but its eyes were open, and it was smiling. Behind it, in the faintest outline of glass and shadow, another figure stood. Her, Clara, looking directly at me. The lights flickered. The monitor hissed. For a moment, both figures seemed to shift, just a flicker, like static crawling under skin. Then everything went dark. When the backup lights came on, the negatives were gone. Only the metal canister remained on the table, half melted. And on the computer screen, still glowing faintly, was a single line of text typed across the image viewer. You developed the wrong one. I didn't go home that night. The power outage at the lab had triggered a lockdown, and by the time the emergency lights flickered back to life, I was sitting on the floor, staring at my own reflection in the glass door of the darkroom. It didn't blink when I did. Maybe it was exhaustion, or the chemical fumes, or the way fear bends reality until it fits its own logic. But for a few seconds, I was certain the reflection was watching me. By morning, I convinced myself it was nothing. Hallucinations. Sleep deprivation. I needed proof, something I could measure, something real. So I decided to run a test. At the lab, I placed a mirror on the evidence table, clean and unbroken. The surface reflected the fluorescent light in sharp, sterile lines. I set up a camera to record both sides of the room simultaneously, one angle facing me, the other the mirror. Then I started talking. Name, Ethan Ward. Time, 9:14 a.m. Subject, reflection consistency test. My voice sounded distant on playback. I raised my right hand. The reflection followed. I turned my head left. The reflection copied. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out Clara's letter, holding it up to the glass. For a split second, the reflection lagged. Not much, half a breath, maybe, but enough. My heart hammered. I lifted my left hand, this time slow, deliberate. The reflection lifted the right. "Jesus," I whispered. I froze, staring at my own unmoving double. Then, without warning, it smiled. A small, deliberate, knowing smile. And with that smile, the fluorescent lights above me began to hum louder. The mirror's surface shimmered like heat rising off asphalt. I stumbled backward, knocking over the camera. Its red light blinked once, twice, then died. When I looked up again, the reflection was gone. The mirror showed only the empty room behind me. And on the table where the mirror had stood, a piece of paper now lay flat. Clara's handwriting. "It's not me you're seeing." When I told the department what happened, they sent someone from Internal Affairs. A polite man in a gray suit with tired eyes. He listened as I described everything, the photos, the tape. The mirror then wrote a few lines in his notebook and asked, "How long have you been working without a break, Mr. Ward?" I didn't answer. He smiled, sympathetic in the way people are when they think you're losing your mind. That afternoon, they placed me on administrative leave. I walked out of the building with a box of files I didn't need and a silence that felt heavier than guilt. Back home, the apartment was colder than before. I hadn't noticed the crack spreading across the bathroom mirror, a thin vein of glass that looked almost organic, as if the reflection itself was fracturing. I poured a glass of water, set it down, and stared at the spot where the mirror used to stand on the table. The paper with Clara's message was still there. "It's not me you're seeing." I turned it over. There was more writing on the back, faint, as though written with a trembling hand. "You were the one behind the camera." For a long moment, I couldn't move. The air thickened, the edges of the room blurred. I tried to remember the day she vanished, the last time I saw her, what we said, what I did. But memory is treacherous. It rearranges itself to protect you. That night, I went through every photograph again. Street corners, reflections, shadows. And in each one, hidden in glass or water or metal, there was a shape behind the lens. A faint silhouette. A figure holding the camera. Me. My hands began to shake. I dropped the stack of photos, watched them scatter across the floor like pieces of something I had broken long ago. One landed face up near my feet. Clara standing at the pier, her eyes fixed not on the horizon, but on whoever stood behind the camera. On me. A knock echoed through the apartment. Slow, deliberate. I turned toward the door. The sound came again, 3 sharp knocks, evenly spaced. Through the peephole, I saw nothing, just the dim hallway light flickering. But when I stepped closer, the light shifted, catching on something metallic. A camera, hanging by its strap on the doorknob. Inside the viewfinder, still active, a message blinked across the screen. Last frame remaining. I don't remember unlocking the door. One moment I was staring at the camera on the doorknob. The next I was inside, holding it, the strap tangled around my wrist like a noose. The camera was old Clara's old Nikon, the one she never went anywhere without. The body was scratched, dented, worn smooth at the edges by her hands. I lifted it to eye level. The viewfinder flickered, faintly glowing. A single number blinked on the screen. 1/1. One frame left. I looked through the lens. The apartment came into focus. The dim light, the scattered photos on the floor, the glass of water still untouched. And then, in the far corner, a movement. Someone standing just out of focus, half in shadow. I turned toward it, but there was no one there. When I looked back through the lens, the figure remained closer now. My hands began to tremble. I pressed the shutter. Click. The sound was small, final, like a breath exhaled after too long. The viewfinder went black for a moment, then flashed white. When the image reappeared, it wasn't the room anymore. It was her, Clara. She was standing in the same place I had been, looking through the same camera, pointing it at me. Our eyes met through the lens. She smiled sadly, almost tenderly. "Now you see." The flash went off. Everything folded inward, the room, the walls, the sound. My vision fractured, turning to static. When I came to, I was standing in front of the mirror again. Only it wasn't a mirror. It was a camera, lens dark, circular, endless. And on the other side of the glass, in a room identical to mine, stood Clara. She raised her hand slowly, placing it against the surface. I did the same. The glass was cold, and then she stepped back. The light dimmed. Her image began to fade, grain by grain, like a photograph burning from the edges inward. The last thing I saw was her eyes. Not frightened, not sad, just resigned. The lens blinked once more. The number on the screen changed from 1/1 to 0.